It's amazing. She has an incredible story of recovery. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. I just am going to start off by giving you a brief overview of what KCRC is. The King County Recovery Coalition is a regional coalition, one of 9, of the Washington Recovery Alliance across the state. We advance substance use recovery and mental wellness by changing public understanding of behavioral health conditions and advocating for pro-recovery policies in King County. We mobilize people like you to raise awareness, change misconceptions, and drive change in behavioral health public policy, because we do recover, and we're the proof. This is how we do it. We host community events that bring the lived experience of people in recovery straight to decision makers. We promote pro-recovery media stories that foster public understanding of behavioral health. We teach people how to tell their own stories of recovery and create connections among individuals and organizations that strengthen the recovery community as a whole. We host guest speakers like Erica on topics ranging from recovery coaching to the role of government in behavioral health systems, because information is a powerful tool for grassroots advocacy. Last but not least, we celebrate recovery together. When you join the movement with KCRC, you'll have the opportunity to network, strengthen your community, use your recovery experience to help others, and provide valuable real-life input to people who make policy decisions that impact us. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I pass the mic to our moderator, I just want to go over a couple of tech information. Ashley is our tech person today. She will be our support. And if you look at the participants list, Ashley has 2 asterisks in front of her name. So you can communicate with her directly in the chat by finding Ashley, and then speaking to her in the chat is what looks like a speech bubble at the bottom of your screen in the middle. And so for this Zoom meeting, I know that all of us have been living on Zoom for many months. I would just say we're going to utilize the chat. That's where you can tell us who you are and where you're from, what part of the state or outside the state, what your connection with recovery is. And if you have questions for Erica and Brad during our community conversation, drop them in the chat and Ashley and Brad will get them to Erica. Also, please use your mute button so we can all hear this fabulous conversation. Mute is what looks like a microphone on the bottom left corner of your screen. Thank you very much, everybody, and let's have a wonderful community conversation. Brad Finegood is a dear friend of mine. He is a member of the King County Recovery Advisory Board and the Washington Recovery Alliance Board. He is also a strategic advisor for King County and Seattle Public Health. It is my great honor to pass the mic for Brad to moderate this event. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everybody. Brad Finegood. I am with Public Health, Seattle King County. Just one other tech item is if you all would be so kind as to turn your camera off as this is going, that will allow Erica and myself to stay at the top. I appreciate it greatly, as much as we totally want to see people's face. So when you do have questions, please feel free to turn your camera on then. As Heather said, my name is Brad Finegood. I'm with Public Health, Seattle King County. That's my day job. I also am on the board of the King County Recovery Coalition and the Washington Recovery Alliance. I am here today not in my role with my county, but I'm here today as a board member. So it is totally an honor and a privilege. As Heather said, recovery is a process and people do recover, and what we are trying to do is highlight stories, and there's no better story to highlight today than Erica Barnett. Erica is the author of Quitter, a memoir of drinking, relapse, and recovery. I'm amazed that I was able to do that because in my screen. But Erica is a long time fixture in the Seattle area and the Seattle scene as a journalist. She's an award-winning political reporter. She started her career at the Texas Observer and the venerable Progressive magazine, co-founded by Molly Ivins, and went on to work as a reporter and news editor for the Austin Chronicle, Seattle Weekly, and The Stranger. If you read her book, you would know that. She now covers addiction, housing, poverty, and drug policy at her blog, The C is for Crank. She has written in a variety of local and national publications, including the Huffington Post, Seattle Magazine, and Grist. So it is a great honor to have Erica here with us today, talking about her new book and her journey and her story of recovery. So Erica, let me start off with a question for you. So in the beginning, in the opening of the book, in the prologue, let me just also come out and a mea culpa that in addition to the hardcover book, your book is available on tape, and that is how I enjoyed your book, as a book on tape, and it was extremely enjoyable read. The reader who did it did a phenomenal job. But as I was listening to the book on tape, the term rock bottom came up in the prologue. I was trying to count, but I really lost count as far as on the number of fingers that I had on my hand about the term rock bottom. And you used it so many times. You used the term so many times just to accent the point that rock bottom is not a thing. So I was wondering if you could talk about this idea of rock bottom and how that came to be in your book.
Yeah, thank you, Brett, and thank you, Heather, for the introductions. I sort of started my process of writing this book with that concept of rock bottom in mind, because, by the time I decided to write the book, I'd been sober for a little while, and I was still, covering a lot of the same issues I had been covering before, things around addiction and homelessness, and particularly in Seattle, we've got a lot of unsheltered homeless people who are suffering from addiction. And there's like a concept, I think, that people really cling to, that if we can just push people to rock bottom, if we can sort of inspire them through misery to get better, then that's how it'll work. And that's what'll make people wake up and decide to get sober. And my own experience showed me that, there's no such thing as rock bottom. Except for death. You hit a rock bottom, you maybe get better for a while, you may relapse a lot of times like I did. And then there's another thing that, like, to an outside observer might look like rock bottom. I use the term rock bottom so much in my book, and particularly in the prologue, just to set up the fact that for me, what got me sober, and I think this is almost a universal truth among people who find recovery or sobriety. What got me to finally quit drinking, which is my drug of choice, was just an internal change. Something changed inside me and I was ready. And I don't think that you can make that happen through external means. I think that assumes that addiction is not a mental disorder and it's not a physical disorder, that it's a disorder of the will. And if you can just make things miserable enough, people will learn that they need to get better. And that to me is just, it's a sickening thought, but it's also a really counterproductive thought, especially when you're trying to do policies or when you're trying to help a loved one. So I really wanted to start out with that framework, that the thing that makes people finally, quote unquote, get it has nothing to do typically with external factors so much as it does with that internal motivation to change. And I think that is almost like something that happens as if by magic. And, and that's not something that you can prescribe by policy. And it's something that just kind of requires people to get help in whatever way is most helpful to them until they finally are actually ready.
Yeah, it's a super interesting concept, and it's a concept that we in the field have, struggled with for a long time, of that rock bottom. And, as you know, and many of the people on the call know, that I lost a loved one to a drug overdose. And, my philosophy is that people don't hit rock bottom until they die. So very much in line with that. I have a ton of other questions that just are spurned from that conversation alone. Well, what I was wondering is if you would be so kind as maybe to do a reading for folks on this call. I mean, let me just say the writing style is just super captivating and fabulous. And I would love it if you would share a reading from the book.
Sure. I'll actually read from the prologue. This is the very beginning of the book, and it is a chapter that is called Rock Bottom. I wake up slowly, like I'm coming out of anesthesia. Something's not right. This isn't my bed. It isn't even my room. I'm lying on the hardwood floor, just inside the door of my one-bedroom apartment. My bag is a few feet away, wallet, glasses, and makeup spilled across the room. My hot pink felt jacket is twisted underneath me, and my keys are on the floor by my head. I noticed a red splotch of blood on the floor. What the hell? I sit up sharply, the room careening around me. Clutching the walls, I stagger to the bathroom, stumbling over a pair of boots discarded in the entryway. I rub the mascara out of my eyes and look at my reflection. Is that a black eye? And why is my lower lip split down the middle? As I peel off my clothes and crawl on top of the bare mattress, I piece the previous day together. At some point in the afternoon, I walked to the Busy Bee convenience store across the street from my apartment and picked up my usual liter of morning wine. These slim cardboard bottles seem to have emerged in the late 2000s as a gift from the booze merchants to bus drinkers and other sneaky alcoholics, as innocent looking as a box of coconut water, and the perfect size for stashing in a purse. I waved off the owner's concern about my bandaged hand, an injury from an aborted hike in the Cascade Mountains a few days earlier, and shuffled out into the sunlight as quickly as possible, pushing my huge tortoiseshell sunglasses back over my puffy eyes. I had planned to walk to the train stop near my house and head downtown to pick up some of the stuff I'd left behind a week earlier at the magazine where I used to work. Instead, I ended up sitting on a bench near the train tracks, drinking the cold, sour wine and calling everyone I knew and many I barely knew at all. Yeah, I sniffled to the former mayor. Things are pretty shitty right now, but maybe this is the wake-up call I needed, you know? Struggling not to slur, I told an ex-boyfriend I hadn't contacted in years. Losing my job is definitely the worst thing that ever happened to me, but I'm going to meetings, I'm doing the things I need to do, and I'm really trying to make the best of this. My friend Sandeep, who was kind enough never to mention the $6,000 I still owed him, was uncharacteristically quiet as I went on and on. What do you think I should do? Go back to rehab? Leave the state? I mean, do you think this might be the kick in the butt I need to get my shit together? I'm sure he answered. I didn't listen. Eventually, it started raining and I was almost out of wine, so I got on the train. I sent a quick text to Emily, the office manager, to let her know I was on my way, then shut my eyes. My phone buzzed angrily in my hand. It was Emily texting. You were supposed to be here an hour ago. You were on some seriously thin fucking ice with me, I thought. Emily was supposed to be my friend. For a while, she and Melissa, one of the top bosses at the magazine, had taken me to AA meetings at lunchtime. In fact, Emily and Melissa were the ones who had driven me to detox a week earlier, dropping me off, sobbing, at Fairfax, a lockdown mental hospital east of Seattle in a leafy suburb that I'd come to think of as the city's rehab annex. I thought they cared about my well-being, but as soon as I had gotten back to work after a 4-day detox that dried me out just enough to start to panic, I was told I no longer had a job. Melissa had helped make that decision, and now 3 days later, Emily was waiting for me to come and clear out my desk. You knew, I fumed. You knew when you took me to Fairfax that they couldn't wait to get rid of me. I took my time getting to my now former workplace, enough time to buy another bottle at a nearby convenience store and drink most of it, ducking into alleys on my way to the office. Some people carry around an internal map of all the places they've had sex. I can map Seattle by its liquor stores, the basement level Crest IGA supermarket by the fancy concert hall where I saw the Monkees play a reunion show in 2013. The corner store in Delhi, just up a flight of steps from my office, where a 4-pack of Gallo commanded a steep $9.99. The liquor store on 2nd and Seneca, where I once pretended not to recognize a government spokesman I knew, because I was so embarrassed to be there, buying a plastic bottle of $8 vodka from behind the counter. By the time I called Emily to come and meet me, it was 5:30 and she was in no mood for small talk. Or maybe she smelled the wine in my breath and noticed that I couldn't walk a straight line from the elevators to the door. Okay, grab your stuff, she barked, standing sentry behind my desk. In my shame-clouded memory, she is tapping her foot impatiently, boring hateful holes in the back of my head. Just then, I realized that I'd forgotten to bring along anything to transport all my files and memorabilia, accumulated over 15 years in reporting jobs from Texas to Seattle. Where are you planning to put all that stuff? Up your ass, bitch. I don't know. I need to figure out what's important here. 5 more minutes passed as I scrambled through my papers with one eye closed, struggling to focus. Photo of me with former Texas Governor Ann Richards, I definitely need that. File of documents about a long dead monorail project, one of the first stories I covered in Seattle, can't let that go. Finally, Emily had had enough. Okay, you need to leave. If you want your stuff, we can mail it to you later. Indignantly, I grabbed my Rolodex and the Ann Richards photo and crammed them into my bike bag. Hours later, I would recall with some embarrassment the empty wine box I had shoved in the back of the file cabinet weeks earlier. Sulking and somehow drunker than when I arrived, I followed Emily downstairs and stormed back out into the rain. From here, my memories get patchy, like watching a film with half the scenes cut out. I walked back to the same store I'd visited an hour earlier, going through a different checkout line with a fresh container of Chardonnay. I made it back to the train, swigging away like I was invisible, and managed to stay awake all the way to my stop. I savored this small victory as I disembarked, recalling all the times a bus driver had nudged me awake at the end of the line. I started walking, then running home as the rain came down harder. I tripped, catching myself for a split second on my injured hand. And then I slammed face first into the concrete. My memory skips forward. I see a couple with an umbrella hurrying past the drunk woman sprawled out on the sidewalk, jeans pulled down, underwear exposed. I see myself figuring out which way is up from the direction the raindrops are falling. I see myself a few blocks later, staggering, deciding whether to lie down in the bushes, wondering what the headlines would say if I died. Promising writer who refused to stop drinking gets what she deserves. Fair enough. It was what I deserved. But I found my legs and I made it home. That was rock bottom, the 4th or 5th one.
Wow. I mean, what a powerful, I mean, that's a powerful story. And let me say, within your book, there's so many more powerful stories. Thanks for sharing that. So, one of the questions that comes to mind is, you are a successful journalist, well-established, your blog, website, The C is for Crank, is super highly regarded by most and feared by others, probably. But I mean, this is really a tell-all book about you and your history, not only with drinking, but there's a lot of history of drugs, early on in your life. One of the things that I think about in my work with substance use is around stigma and how people are afraid to tell their story, and so why tell your story, Erica? Why come out with really a tell-all memoir book of everything that you've been through?
Yeah, well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Brad. I mean, it's about getting away from stigma and getting away from shame. And I think that by the time I was ready to write this book, I had gotten away from the idea that I had anything to be ashamed of, but that was the most crippling thing for me in early recovery. And in early recovery, all the times that I, got sober for a while and then relapsed, it's that feeling of just, not just everything is so messed up that it's going to take forever to fix it and it's impossible, so I might as well drink again, but also just that feeling of, I am so deeply ashamed of the things I have done and the ways that I have hurt people. And I think stigma comes from shame. And I think, as a society, if there is stigma around addiction, it comes from that sense that it's something to be ashamed of. And the fact is, this is, as I said, this is a disease in my opinion. I experienced it as something that I had absolutely no control over, just like you would experience any other disease, except that I ultimately was able to get the tools so that I don't have to drink anymore. But I couldn't really do that until I got away from the idea that that this is something that happened because of me, because of something I did, because of something that's wrong with me. And so it's really important to tell those stories. And in the book, I mean, I could have written a book 5 times as long as this with, 5 times as many, equally awful stories. But in telling the kind of the low points in my life, as well as just a lot of personal history, I'm saying, look, this is nothing to be ashamed of. I am, you know, a somewhat prominent person that, you know, people don't know a lot about personally, or didn't before. And I'm not ashamed to talk about this stuff, and you shouldn't be either.
Yeah, it always reminds me of the philosophy of that everybody has a story, right? So no matter who we come upon in our lives, in our day-to-day lives, or people who are living unsheltered, or people who are struggling, or you know the graphic imagery of you lying on the sidewalk, you know, pants, you know, halfway down, you know, if somebody walks by that person, that is a person, right? And so like knowing that. Can you talk a little bit about this idea of relapse and how relapse plays a role in is sort of intrinsic to this process on a continuum? I mean, you can talk about it much more eloquently than I can.
Well, I think that, you know, relapse is not inevitable. You know, you go into, if you're in 12 steps, you know, they'll tell you, you don't have to drink again, even if you want to. And that's absolutely true. But the truth is that most of us do relapse. And I mean, just statistically speaking, you are more likely to relapse at least once than you are to find recovery right away. And the reason I think that is really important for people to realize, whether it's policymakers or loved ones or people trying to get into recovery themselves, is, you know, it's you can feel like a failure if you think that that the goal is to be sort of one and done. You know, maybe to go to treatment for 28 days and come out, you know, clean and shiny and never use or drink again. That's great if you can do it, but at the same time, I mean, if you do relapse, it's a setback, but it's not the end of the story. And you haven't like lost your time. You have gained things and knowledge in any period of recovery you've had, you know, whatever that recovery means for you. Because I, you know, I certainly, you know, I know people who consider themselves in recovery from drugs, who still drink, and that is sort of a harm reduction method for them. So you know, I embrace all concepts of recovery. For me, it means sobriety. But yeah, I think that we have to be honest with ourselves, and treatment centers have to be honest with people who are going into these treatment modalities that kind of stress relapse prevention, and say, okay, so yes, we're going to teach you relapse prevention, but we're also going to teach you how to deal with a relapse when it happens or if it happens. Because I came out of treatment thinking, you know, that I was fine now, that I like had all the tools, and I had spent my 28 days and I learned, and I went to treatment twice. And I just had a very false sense of what recovery was going to look like and how much of a struggle it was actually going to be.
She's short of.
Man, I got like so many questions. I'm so glad that I'm the one who gets to facilitate this. I get to ask my question. No, so you and I share an interesting really moment in time that I'll talk about for a second that I didn't realize the levity of at that moment in time until you shared it with me many years later. Erica and I were sitting at Recovery Place Seattle. The Valley Cities had reopened the detox a couple of years ago. And I saw you there, and we touched base and we talked. And what I didn't realize at the time was the very differing significance of that moment for me than for you. Do you wanna talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was such an interesting moment, and I write about it at the very end of my book. I had been at recovery centers of King County, which was in the building beforehand, and I had like literally, I mean, I had just like the vaguest memories of the inside of the place, and it was a dump before. I mean, you know, I know people got sober there or got sober there. They had a treatment program, but it was one of those points where you might say, wow, that was a rock bottom, that you ended up in that place and then walked out. I mean, I left against medical advice because I was like, I can't take this. It was in the middle of August. It was so hot. No air conditioning, and just like one of my most miserable experiences. And I say that from a place of privilege. I had been to detox before, and it was up in Ballard at Swedish, and then at various other places. And then I went to more detoxes after that. but it was just kind of this moment where I was like, oh, wow, like this is where I have landed. I mean, it is a free place, and, you know, it just, and then I walked out and I walked straight into a liquor store. And so coming back, years later, I didn't realize I was coming back. I didn't realize it was the place that I had been. I mean, if you had asked me, I would have said, oh, that's in a neighborhood across town. I had no memory of where it was. I mean, nothing. And so I'm like sitting there, you know, at this press conference, and Brad, you were there in the back, I think. And I'm like looking around, and I just looked outside for half a second, and I realized that I recognized one thing, which was the smoking area, because it was the only place you could go to get any air. And it all just kind of flooded back to me in just this instant. And I realized I'd been there before, and it was just such a profound full circle. I think I'd been sober for about a year or two at that point. Yeah, it was just amazing. I mean, I was gleeful because, you know, sometimes, you know, those of you in recovery probably know this experience well, where things just kind of come full circle, and you're like, you see a place that you've been a million times in a totally different light as you sort of like have new experiences in sobriety or recovery. And that was just probably the most profound example of that, but it happens all the time, you know, where you just like, you see a place or you experience something that, that layers over some other experience you had in the past. And it's so magical. It was such a great moment.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And now for me, being able to like remember that moment makes it that much more special for me, knowing how special it was for you and all the work that had went into that. Stacy shared a comment that she had, and I like the way that this is framed, that there's multiple treatment episodes trying to get sober, and each time help to the final try. So that idea of building it out, and that her husband and how things come around, and how her husband is now the director of Recovery Place Seattle. So that's
so cool.
That's pretty awesome. That's so good. You, in addition to Recovery Place and Fairfax, you've sort of made your rounds in this town as far as like treatment facilities go, as far as like there's a fair amount of hospitalizations that you experienced, residential treatment facilities, as you said. So like what, you know, for a person in recovery, like in working towards that long-term sustained recovery, what for you, like, what are some of your thoughts about like what works, what doesn't work? You know, you talked a little bit about, you know, the philosophy of rock bottom and you know, the role of shame and how we purvey shame. I think Darcel put a comment up earlier about how somebody in the treatment, in one of the treatment groups she was in, said that they needed to push more shame or more pushing people towards rock bottom. But so like, what were some of your thoughts about some of the things that worked and some of the things that didn't work that you saw for yourself and maybe some other people too?
Yeah, I mean, and I do think this is really individual, but for me, I mean, you know, it's over time, I've come to sort of think, okay, these are the things that I still practice in my life. One was cognitive behavioral therapy. I personally found that incredibly helpful, particularly in getting away from shame, because you sort of think your worst thoughts and then you talk back to them, and, you know, and it's a writing process, and not a lot of people, you know, a lot of people don't like that, but I found it super helpful. I found AA helpful. I think that AA is a really disorganized form of cognitive behavioral therapy done by non-professionals over a long period of time. And the thing I found most helpful about just going to meetings, and I think this is probably true of other types of support group meetings, is that people came back from things that were much worse than what I experienced, and could laugh about it. And I found that so perplexing when I first started going to meetings. And then I really came to understand it. And now I can participate in it. And so I think that realizing that recovery and sobriety were not going to be like this miserable, like slog of just, you know, trying to repair damage forever, was really helpful for me, because it gave me a sense of like, I might not be there yet, but I probably will be, because these people, and for me, particularly women, got through things that were, objectively way worse than what I had to deal with. Like I said, I have a lot of privilege. I had health insurance. That was hugely important for me. And so that was really helpful. Alcohol is my drug of choice. There's not a lot of good medication for alcohol, for cravings. I mean, there's good medication for withdrawals, but I did take gabapentin. That was really helpful for me in the first 6 months. And I consider that now to be a kind of medication assisted therapy or treatment. But it really is, it's so individual to every person. And I think the thing is, if something doesn't work, whether it's, treatment, or some, quote unquote work, I put work in big air quotes. But if something doesn't feel right for you, maybe it's not right. You shouldn't go to treatment 19 times. I've known so many people who spent, went into tremendous debt to go to treatment over and over again. And I think if you're doing that, maybe you've learned everything you're going to learn there. And it's time to try something different. I got sober finally out of detox. I checked into my last detox. I knew I was done. And as it turned out, I was done. Because, you can know it and it doesn't necessarily make it so, but detox is not a place that a lot of people get sober, but it happens to be my last stop was at detox.
Yeah. And, this is the second time now in this conversation already that you've mentioned that you come from a place of privilege. And I just want to talk about that a little bit we have so many people in our community who don't have privilege. And so, just sort of, and I don't really know where my question is, but just sort of thinking about how do we how do we provide opportunities to people who don't necessarily have the privilege that you or I or other people may have come from?
Yeah, I think that, let's just look at the privilege that I had. So I had a place to live and I had a place to go back to. And the reason I had that place is because, I kind of came from this family of origin, family history where we just did for ourselves. And, the idea of, I was financially independent from a very young age and all that stuff. However, when I was about to get evicted from my house, for my apartment, my parents gave me $1,000 and they've never asked for it back. That's privilege. So housing, actually having a place to go into, once you get out of, or once you get past a crisis, whether it's getting out of treatment or getting out of detox or the hospital or whatever it may be, housing stability, that was, I cover homelessness, and I cannot imagine the struggles that people have trying to get sober on the streets. It's so much harder, or even living in shelter or whatever sort of unstable housing situation you have. So that was, I think that is the number one most important bit of stability people deserve, particularly people who are trying to get into recovery. Another privilege was that I did go into tremendous debt because I was in hospitals all the time, but my debt, I would still probably be, pulling my way out of it if I hadn't had health insurance. And so we need some form of treatment on demand. I don't think it should be one size fits all or, court mandated, you have to go into this treatment facility. But, we don't have detox on demand. We don't have treatment on demand. When I was trying to get into detox, I went a few times, but there are also many times when I called and they just didn't have a bed. And that was for somebody with health insurance, because believe me, they ask you that first. So I gave up over and over again. I would just say, oh, well, I guess next time I am up to it, I'll do it, but not right now. And so when people want to get into detox, they need to be able to get in there right away. And because it's not safe, particularly with alcohol, it's not safe if you're a severe alcoholic to detox on your own. You can die. Same thing with some other drugs. But, I just think that we don't set people without money and privilege up for success, and then we blame them for failure, and we call it failure when it's, all the conditions are there to make it, virtually impossible for them to stay sober. Because, I know for me, when I started using drugs, it was self-medication. When I started drinking, it was to feel comfortable in my own skin, which is a form of self-medication. I mean, I was self-medicating against, basic life stuff. Now, pile onto that, you don't have a job, you don't have a place to live, you've got people who want to arrest you just for being in the public right of way. And I am just astonished by the power of people who, and just the resilience of people who managed to get sober with all of those obstacles that I didn't have to contend with. So I think I believe very strongly that if we don't invest in those things, we're not going to see, any of these interlocking crises solved.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many layers to that, like you were saying, and there's so many layers to need. But like, again, if we have a system where people, are in systems of care or even in systems that don't perpetuate care, and then, they leave those systems and they don't have stability. I was thinking about that in your opening reading when you're like, I pulled myself off the sidewalk and made it back to where I was living. If you don't have a place to live, right, then you don't have that. Or if you don't have a roof over your head or whatever that is. A couple, there's some comments that are coming in, but one of the questions before we get into some of the questions, the role, you talked a little bit about your upbringing, or the sort of, you talked about significantly in the book that early on in your life, there are what I, as like a recovering therapist, would call significant traumas. And so you had a good friend who passed away, that you were very close with, and there was a strong bond and connection between the two of you. And then also about not having a mother, or not having your biological mother, I should say, in the household. And I mean, do you want to talk a little bit? There's been so much research around adverse childhood experiences and trauma like that, but can you talk about that as sort of,
Yeah, like I said, my family was the kind of family that, did not express emotion very much. I mean, we screamed, but that was kind of the only emotion. And I should say, like, overall, like, I love my parents who raised me. My grandparents raised me for the first portion of my life. And, and I think they did a good job and the best job that they could. But they're just kind of, I'm from the South. I don't know if that makes a difference, but we kind of, didn't talk about certain things. And so one of the things we didn't talk about was the fact that my biological mother was just never in the picture, and I never knew her. I didn't ask about it. I wanted to know, but I didn't ask about it, and I didn't realize that was a trauma. And I still resist this idea that it's a trauma, even though I know that it is, and it was. But I didn't realize that was a trauma until after I got sober, and a therapist was like, "Do you have any traumas?" And I was like, "I don't know, not really. I mean, my mom wasn't there, and I didn't actually know her till I was in my 30s." And she was like, "That's a trauma." My best friend killed herself when I was 14. And that's, I was already kind of going down like the path of doing a lot of drugs as I was sort of entering high school. But yeah, I became a very heavy drug user after that. And ultimately stopped using drugs too, in high school. But I think that it was, as I said, like an attempt to self-medicate, and sort of soothe myself, because it didn't feel like the kind of thing that I had the right to talk about or to feel, to mourn about for very long. Because I came from a family where you just kind of stuff things. And so, yeah, so when I learned about adverse childhood experiences, which I didn't know about the connection until I was writing this book and I was researching. And it did kind of click, like, oh wow, I guess I had a few of those. So I think the connection is, and again, I mean, I'm sure this is all cumulative, and I had a pretty good childhood for people who have more trauma, and I know lots and lots of people in recovery who come from a lifetime of trauma. It makes some sort of self-soothing, and particularly addiction, really, really likely.
Yeah, I forgot my I had a question on the tip of my tongue and then I lost it. Yeah, this whole idea about like knowing that people are like that there's so much trauma. You know, it also goes along with everybody has their own individual experience and individual story. There's a question which is in the chat box from Katie. Katie, can I just have you unmute your phone and ask the question?
Yeah, I'm eating lunch. I apologize. I have food. No, I'm just wondering, you were talking about, you know, going to detox and going to all these different treatment centers. And I was wondering if you had any comment on the idea of the treatment industrial complex, i.e. all these organizations that sort of rely on people relapsing and having to go to treatment multiple times. If you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I realized when I was in treatment, particularly the second time. I went to Lakeside Milam, and I don't feel bad mentioning them because I ultimately had a very good experience there, and one that I felt helped me a lot. But I also met people there who I met a woman who had been to treatment 19 times, and she told me, and I have since met people who've been like more times than that, and what she told me was this is like her little reset that she does every few months, and her parents would send her there and they would pay for it. And, you know, I mean, that place isn't, I mean, it's not Promises Malibu, but it's not cheap. I mean, at the time, I think it was like $12,000. And so, yeah, I mean, the treatment industry relies on people relapsing. The current structure of treatment would not work financially if people weren't repeat customers. And this is why I say, I mean, I don't like to give anything that resembles medical advice to anybody, but having gone to treatment twice, I mean, I did make a conscious decision in the depths of my addiction. I mean, I knew there was no point in going back to treatment again a third time for me, because I learned, but I mean, both treatment centers were based on this kind of like Hazelden modality, but, you know, maybe 10 years behind where Hazelden actually is. And, you know, and I had learned what I was going to learn there. And I think that, you know, cynically, on my cynical days, I think that the reason they don't teach you about how to deal with relapse when it happens is because they know it's going to happen and they know you're going to be back. And and I write in the book about how the response to failed treatment among treatment centers is always more treatment. Like, and if you go in for an assessment, I mean, they're never going to assess you and say, oh, you don't need treatment. I mean, you're at their treatment center. Of course you need treatment at their treatment center. So I became very cynical about treatment in the course of going through it. I am glad that I went the times that I did, but I wouldn't recommend somebody who goes a couple times to just keep going, because you're just feeding into that system and keeping all these treatment centers alive. And, you know, and there's a lot of less scrupulous ones out there that will take your $90,000 and put you on a horse and see you back in 6 months.
If anybody tried to put me on a horse, that's a no. No matter how much they paid me. One of the things, you know, when I was listening to the book on tape, when I was reading the book, is that it is an extremely well-researched book. You did a marvelous job of like doing your homework. It's not just like a memoir of your experience, but it's really founded in research. And so can you talk about like why that was important for you? I mean, I'm sure being a journalist had something to do with it, but if there's anything like really there are a couple of research moments that I read about in your book that sort of stuck out to me personally, but was there anything that really stuck out to you while doing your research for this book?
Well, okay, I'm going to answer that in a couple ways. I mean, one, I wanted to, I mean, yes, as a journalist, it is very hard for me to not want to fact check myself on stuff that I assume is true, but that I really want to, you know, make sure that I know what I'm talking about. So there was that. The other thing, I mean, about research, one thing that was really, really interesting to me and that kind of fed into the little bit of cynicism I was talking about is that I got all my treatment notes and from both treatment facilities and from one of the detoxes. And I read what they thought of me. And it felt like so, and I see somebody in the comment is pointing out that treatment facilities want people to fit into their molds. And that's what it felt like. It felt like they were sort of looking at me and saying, she's going to fail, which was true. I mean, they were right. I relapsed. So they got that right. But it seemed like they were saying she's going to fail because she failed to do these defined things that we set out for her to do. And I thought that was really, really interesting that, like, you know, I think one of the things I did was I refused to say that I would sign a thing that would go to all my future doctors saying I couldn't take opiates. And I was the only person in the whole treatment center that did that. And I felt like a real jerk, but I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't like opiates. I usually refuse them anyway, and I just don't want to do that. But that was like a black mark against me in my treatment file. Intellectualizing was a black mark. You know, trying to get a job in journalism, like wanting to have a job in journalism at some point in the near future after I got sober was a black mark. I mean, because they wanted me to go get what they called a recovery job, which meant, like, you know, for me, it would probably be something in retail. So I'm serious. Like, I have experience in retail. Like, and there's no shame in working for Target. Like, that's what I always say now. Like, if this journalism thing fails, I can always go work at Target. But anyway, it just made me realize, like, and that sent me down the path of kind of looking into what actually works and what treatment centers and the recovery industrial complex, as somebody called it, you know, what they say works. And I think those are often two very different things.
Yeah, you know, there's often a dichotomy in ideas. Well, between sort of recovery and harm reduction. The first KCRC present that we did was around the connection between harm reduction and recovery. You know, in their sort of treatment, and there's 12 steps. You know, you have found your recovery journey towards abstinence with the 12 steps and AA. And can you talk about, like, though, how harm reduction plays a role in that? Like, should we have an abstinence only approach to things? Those type of questions from your opinion.
Yeah, I mean, the answer to that is no. We should not have an abstinence-only approach to anything, because I don't think that is that's not an approach that's going to encompass everybody. I mean, for me, like, I do believe that, just speaking for myself, I cannot drink again. I get out of control extremely quickly when I drink, and it always spirals in the exact same way. So that's me, and I think that's a lot of people. And that's why I think, like, you know, AA and 12-step are really, really useful for a lot of people. However, I also, like I said, I used medication to get sober. That really helped me. And I'm not ashamed of it. Like, I honestly don't think it would have necessarily worked if I hadn't had some help. And so I am happy to say that, like, around here in my experience, you know, 12-step groups more or less allow you, you know, more or less are not judgmental about people who are on medication assisted treatment, but they are essentially abstinence groups. I think for a lot of people, that's not going to be the thing that works. And I mentioned my friend who used to be addicted to heroin, who now drinks. Do I think that's the healthiest habit? Probably not. But it's definitely a harm reduction approach, and he's way better off. And, you know, if people are capable of reducing their use and improving their lives, that is an improvement. I mean, you know, the cliche is better, right? And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that we should start from what would be an improvement for you. What can you do that will make your life better? As opposed to starting from, we are going to force you, you know, this, as a judge in a courtroom, I'm going to force you to go to AA or NA. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've seen those folks sitting in those meetings, and, you know, and they're not happy to be there. And it's not because, you know, there's something wrong with them. It's because that isn't working for them. And so we need other modalities that do work for people who are not interested in, or not ready for, or, you know, for whom an abstinence only approach just doesn't work.
One of the things we were talking about previously when before we had this conversation is around the opposite of addiction, substance use disorder. Is not necessarily abstinence, but it's connection. And that, you know, giving credit to, you know, the author Johann Hari about, you know, lost connections and about connection. So can you talk about some of the connections in your life that were essential to your recovery and your recovery journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is kind of getting back to the concept of guilt and shame again. I was very, very fortunate because I didn't have to lose my friends. And one of the things that, some recovery groups will tell you is you've got to get all new friends. And I think that's really harmful if your friends aren't harming you and if they are a source of support. So I have a best friend who I write about in the book who was incredibly supportive of me, and I was so lucky to have him. When I was trying to get sober and relapsing, my friends desperately wanted me to get better, and I found that they were all there when I was ready to go back to them and say, look, I'm back. I know that you don't believe that right now, but just give me some time. And all my friends are still that I had before I got sober, I still have, which is amazing. I have a very supportive family. I know a lot of people don't have that, but I was really fortunate. And honestly, I mean, going back to just support groups, I mean, just in those early days, and actually when I say early days, I mean before I stopped drinking, when I was still drunk all the time, I would go to AA meetings and I would sit there and I would just absorb what I could of people's stories, not so much like from a program perspective where I wanted to know what their program was or whatever they did. I just wanted to know that it was possible. And being around people, even strangers, just talking about like their own experience and gave me some hope that it was possible. And so just that kind of connection, from like 2008 through 2014, like I'm not kidding, I did this for a long time on and off. That was part of my journey and I found it really helpful ultimately.
So lots of amazing comments and thoughts coming in the chat and all of this. I was wondering if, like, because our time is running a little bit short, if you maybe, and it was so good, the first one, if you would be willing to do a second reading for us, if that would be cool.
I'll do a very, very short one.
Awesome.
And it's one we were talking about earlier. Let me find it. All right. Okay, so this is like, we'll take like a minute and a half. Recently, I had an opportunity to revisit the old recovery centers of King County building where I went to detox back in 2014. The detox center of last resort where the orderlies barked instructions like prison wardens and my roommate taught me to make a pillow out of towels. The occasion was the grand opening of a new detox and treatment center in the same building, and I was there this time as press. I made it all the way inside and to my chair before I realized I had been there before. Everything looked different. Everything, that is, except the tiny fenced-in yard where the patients had been allowed to go once an hour to smoke. Looking out at the courtyard from a room that had once been the center's cafeteria but was now swarming with elected officials, medical professionals, and other members of the press, I had a sense memory so strong it took my breath away of the first time I stood out in that courtyard and tried to fill my lungs with oxygen through all the smoke. A young woman with elaborate eye makeup was talking about her plans to go back home to her drug dealer boyfriend as soon as she got out. A guy was complaining about getting robbed the night before. I was standing on the outside of the circle of smokers, hoping someone would come over and talk to me. I never felt like I fit in with RCKC, with all the homeless people and junkies and kids with ankle bracelets who were only there because they had to be. But of course I did. I knew it then when I lined up for vitals check at the single metal chair by the entrance, where the nurse yelled at me for leaning into the men's quarters to grab a pillow. And I knew it now, looking down the once damp, dripping hallway at a set of brightly lit new rooms with wood-grained vinyl floors, all ready for the first crop of addicts and drunks to stagger to their metal beds with their thin plastic mattresses. During a quiet moment on the press tour, I snuck into one of the empty detox rooms. I knew, as the rest of the press didn't, that there were no locks on the doors, and poked my head into the bathroom. I wanted to see if they still had the shitty, unbreakable metal mirrors. The mirrors had gotten an upgrade, no more distortion, but they were still unbreakable, and I looked at my reflection and gave myself a thumbs up. It isn't often that you get to visit a dreadful moment in your past, walk right on the site of events you never want to live through again, and see how everything has changed and how much you've changed. I walked back to the old nurses' station where the new treatment director was taking questions. I raised my hand. What did this place used to be like? So Brad, if you're not at the end yet, that's how it ends.
I know. I'm like, I'll get there. I'll get there. I only have like a couple more chapters left, but I'll get there. But like, man, just like big hearts, right? Like that moment for you must have been so surreal. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it was great. And it also shows, I mean, I think that, when I was there, I really did feel, this was probably in, I think I said 2014. And I really did still kind of cling to this notion that I was different than other people and that I was unique and my addiction was like better than other people's addiction because I was this strong, independent person who like maintained the sense of self through everything. And then what I came to realize, and particularly when I went to Lakeside Milam Treatment Center after this period of detox, what I came to realize is like, nope, my addiction is exactly like everybody else's. I mean, people's recovery may look different, but my addiction was the same as the person who, got wheeled into the treatment center and was so yellow that from jaundice that, he almost didn't look alive. It's the same as the person who had to have like multiple organs replaced and was still coming back to treatment. I mean, it's just that I hadn't gotten to that point yet. I was going there. And so, I stopped feeling so superior pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, it makes me think about like just my personal philosophy about how everything sort of comes full circle and sometimes just being able to stop and smile at the moments that in our life. So thinking back, Erica, like to your younger self, I mean, we're all still young, but like to yourself, like what, like, I mean, and I know this is sort of like, it actually sort of mimics one of the experiences you were talking about in your book of like a treatment experience, but like, what advice would you give yourself? Like now looking back, would you change anything? I mean, I know it's all part of the journey, but like, is there any thoughts that you have for your younger self?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just for me, but it's probably applicable to a lot of people. I wish I had told myself that my work was not my life because I lost my job. I got fired, as I say in the very first, few pages of the book. And I thought my life was over. I mean, I really did. I thought like, well, like I may live another 60 years, but I'm never going to have a job in journalism again. I'm going to be, a failure for the rest of my life. I'm useless and worthless. And, whatever that may be for, any other person, for me, it was my work. I wish I had known that like life is a lot bigger than one thing. And that, like the possibilities that opened up to me when I got sober were so much bigger and better than where I was headed. So I think I wish I had known that like you can do anything you want with your life, within the boundaries that exist for you. And, and again, acknowledging my privilege, I didn't have to keep living the life I was living. So I wish I had known that. And I also wish I had known that, and what I would tell a younger person or a person, struggling with substance use, wondering if they should, change the way they're using substances or quit. If you're drinking or using drugs to fit in, to feel more comfortable in your own skin, to put up with abuse from friends or coworkers, because that was also a big part of my story. If you're bored or if you're drinking to heal or using drugs to heal some kind of hurt in yourself, then, it's really important to take a pause and examine what that hurt is or what that thing is you're medicating against, even if it's just like the perceived disapproval of your peers or your fear that you're going to be boring if you're not drunk. Or awkward. I mean, that was a big part of it for me. It was just feeling like I wasn't enough on my own. And so, I wish I had told myself you are enough. Because honestly, like I don't recognize the person I was back in, the mid 2000s, the late 2000s, as I was kind of developing this this drinking problem that got out of control. I don't know who that person is. I mean, it was me, but it was me, you know, really scared of herself. And so, yeah, so I wish I could go back and tell myself that I was enough just as I was.
Yeah, thank you. And that's so important, right? Is to feel okay with yourself and who you are. There's a question from Gerald. Gerald, do you want to unmute your line and go for the ask the question? Let's see if I can. Gerald, are you there? Looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Thank you for being patient. You know, I put in a comment about, you know, there's talk about enabling and codependence. And I get very sharply criticized. And I have not been a believer in tough love. But I keep hearing over and over again, well, they'll get better when they hit bottom. And so I feel a little encouraged, but I was wondering what comments you might have and what some of the other participants might have, what their comments might be.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny, when I went to my first treatment, my mom came out and I was just kind of like spewing what I had heard in treatment, and some of it was good advice, and one was to go to Al-Anon. And my mom did that. And, you know, it's not specific, this isn't specifically about Al-Anon, but it's about learning about codependence. And I think that, and my family started treating me a little differently, which is to say, you know, my mom stopped taking my calls at 2 a.m. And she stopped doing things that were unreasonable that I was demanding of her, but she never stopped supporting and loving me. And they never cut me off. And I don't think that, I mean, you know, I don't have to go through that. So I don't know if they would have eventually, but, you know, they never like said, we're done with you, or go off and hit rock bottom and come back to us when, you know, when you're better. And I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that people heal that way. And I don't think they get into recovery that way. So I think for each, you know, individual person, like it is a balance that you have to strike for yourself with what you're comfortable with, without feeling like you're being walked all over. But I, you know, as I said, I don't believe that rock bottom is like this, this magical thing that inspires people to get sober or get into recovery. I mean, it just doesn't. And so you know, I don't want to give specific advice on like when enough is enough for you or any other individual. But, you know, with my parents, I mean, when they said enough is enough, it was about, you know, it was about boundaries. It wasn't about, you know, cutting me off or trying to show me the error of my ways. It was just like, here are some healthy boundaries that we're going to set. And I think that is a good idea. So, you know, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of where I would draw the line between codependency and, you know, and quote unquote enabling, which I think is a really problematic concept.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Erica, we're almost up to time. This has just been such a fun conversation, and Lord knows there's 20 million other things that I'd love to talk about. But, you know, I'd love to open it up to you, to any, you know, final thoughts, any words. I'm not allowed, you know, to help sell your book. But I can say that I do know from experience that it is available on Audible also. But any final words that you have for folks here today before we pass it back to Heather?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anybody who is trying to get into recovery, who is trying to help someone get into recovery, or, you know, is in any other way dealing with people who are struggling, I think that the main kind of message of my book is that relapse is not the end of the story. And I think that, you know, getting beyond the idea that people have to be, have to go into treatment, come out like a, you know, like a magical car wash. Somebody, maybe it was you, Brad, described it this way to me one time. that is just a reckless idea, and it's harmful. And I think, you know, if I could impart one thing, it's that, you know, you don't lose what you gained when you relapse. You still have everything that you learned. And that's true for whether you've been sober for 5 years or 2 days, or, you know, or whatever recovery means for you. So yeah, it's you can always keep trying, and the only failure is to stop trying.
Thank you so much. So I will just say on behalf of like all of the work that I am involved in my day job at the for King County, for all of the work that I'm involved in with the Washington Recovery Alliance, and as a loved one who has somebody who died of an overdose, just my eternal gratitude for you being here with us today, but also sharing your story and having the courage to share your story in print, to work towards to destigmatizing what addiction is. And I can't thank you enough. And on behalf of the Washington Recovery Alliance and everybody on this call today, I just thank you so much. And so I am going to pass it back to Heather.
Thank you so much, Brad. And thank you so much, Erica, for gracing us with your presence and sharing so authentically today. I am just really grateful and touched by your story. And I love that you talk about not losing that time, that we keep the time. I mean, we keep the gifts and the blessings from the time that we had if we go out and relapse. That was my story too. And I went to treatment of different types and descriptions probably 7 or 8 times before I was able to stay in recovery. And I just think it's such a powerful message that we can and do recover. So Ashley has put up some slides for me. Our upcoming activities that we have with the King County Recovery Coalition in September is, first off, it's National Recovery Month in September, and so everybody is going to be celebrating. We will be doing a recovery scavenger hunt as our activity and event this year due to COVID. So stay tuned, and there's a link in the chat that you can sign up if you'd like more information about our scavenger hunt. It's going to be loads of fun, and we are going to have an Elevate Recovery Advocacy training on September 12th, and this is where you can learn how to share your story or the story of your loved one in a way that is impactful for good with the media and lawmakers, and it's a really wonderful training. I've done it a number of times. The next KCRC Presents will be on Thursday, September 17th, and that topic is going to be a deep dive of recovery coaching, and we will be having a panel of guest speakers for that, which will be, there it is, very interesting, and you can register for that and get all the information. And King County Recovery Coalition will be having a coalition meeting in September as well. And that will be on Wednesday, September, I think it's the 9th. It's the second Wednesday in the month. It's the Wednesday right after Labor Day, and it will be at 6:30 in the evening. So if you would like to get more information on that, you can also, you can email me at heather@kcrc.org. And that is all of my announcements. We're so grateful. What a wonderful conversation and topic today. Thank you, Erica, and everyone. I highly endorse this book. It is amazing and powerful. Thank you for being so brave and so bold, and for doing the work that you do in the world, Erica. We're so blessed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such an honor.
Thank you, Erica. Yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Such a fabulous moderator.
And we'll share the recordings of this with everybody also.
Absolutely. Yes, we will. And we will be sending out the next steps as well. Thanks, you. Have a great day, everyone. Stay safe.